where you're standing is not right here.
Thank you all very much for being here. I'm delighted to be joined by Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky, Illinois. Next week, we will be celebrating the 4th of July, the day when the founders of this country declared independence from what they viewed as a tyrannical aristocracy in England. Yet today, in many respects, the tyrannical aristocracy is no longer a foreign power, but a billionaire class which now has unprecedented economic and political power over the American people. In fact, if we do not make the necessary changes to reduce skyrocketing wealth and income inequality, this country, in my view, is well on its way to becoming an oligarchic form of society, a nation in which a handful of extremely wealthy people control not only our economy, but our political life as well. Let's be clear. The United States is the wealthiest nation in the history of the world, but the vast majority of our people don't sense that, don't feel that, because almost all of the wealth is concentrated in the hands of the few. In the year 2015, the U.S. has, by far, the most unequal distribution of wealth and income of any major developed country on earth, and this inequality is worse today than at any time since 1928. We are moving in exactly the wrong direction. The fact of the matter is that over the past 40 years, we have witnessed an enormous transfer of wealth from the middle class and working families of our country to multimillionaires and billionaires. Now, my Republican colleagues often express their fear about wealth distribution. In fact, that is exactly what has been happening over the last 30 years. There has been a massive transfer of wealth, but it has gone from the middle class and working families to the people at the top. According to the most recent statistics, and this chart makes it pretty clear, the share of the nation's wealth going to the bottom 90% of Americans has gone down from 36% in 1985 to just 22.8% in 2013. Meanwhile, over the same time period, the top 0.1% saw its share of the nation's wealth more than double, going from 10% in 1985 to 22% today. In other words, the top 0.1% own nearly as much wealth as the bottom 90% of Americans. That is an extraordinary and tragic reality. In the last 2 years, I want you to picture this, in the last 2 years, the wealthiest 15 people in this country, 15 people, about what's sitting in this room right now, saw an increase in their wealth by $170 billion. Increase in wealth in 2 years, $170 billion. That is more wealth that is owned collectively by the bottom 130 million Americans. Today, the wealthiest family in this country, the Walton family, is now worth more than the bottom 42% of the American people. In terms of income, not wealth, income, the top 1% earns more than the bottom 50%. Since the Great Recession of 2008, 99% of all new income is now going to the top 1%. At a time when the rich are getting richer and when almost all new income and wealth is going to the people on top, how have my Republican colleagues responded to this grotesque level of income and wealth inequality? Well, what they have done, unbelievably, is to pass legislation which provides a $269 billion tax break to the wealthiest 5,400 Americans in this country, the top 0.2%. So in the midst of massive wealth and inequality, what the Republicans have said is, oh, let us give the very, very, very wealthiest people a gigantic tax break. And they do this by completely repealing the estate tax. Now, in my view, this is wrong morally. We should not exacerbate income and wealth inequality when it is so bad today. It is wrong economically. We do not need to be putting more money into the hands of the very richest people in this country while the middle class continues to decline. But this is not just what Bernie Sanders believes or what Jan Schakowsky believes. More than a century ago, President Teddy Roosevelt, a good Republican, fought for the creation of a progressive estate tax in order to reduce the enormous concentration of wealth that existed during the Gilded Age. And this is what President Teddy Roosevelt said about 100 years ago, quote, "The absence of effective state and especially national restraint upon unfair money getting has tended to create a small class of enormously wealthy and economically powerful men whose chief object is to hold and increase their power. The prime need is to change the conditions which enable these men to accumulate power. Therefore, I believe in a graduated inheritance tax on big fortunes, properly safeguarded against evasion and increasing rapidly in amount with the size of the estate." End of quote. Teddy Roosevelt. Don't hear too many Republicans speaking that language today. While Roosevelt spoke those words in 1910, they are even more relevant today. Income and wealth inequality, in my view, is the great moral issue of our time. It is the great economic issue of our time. And as a result of Citizens United, it is the great political issue of our time. No great nation can flourish when so few have so much and so many have so little. Now, one of the straightforward ways to address wealth inequality, invest in the disappearing middle class, and preserve our democracy is to enact a progressive estate tax on multimillionaires and billionaires. As you know, for almost 100 years, this country has had an estate tax on the books that only taxes the inheritances of the very wealthiest people in this country. Today, that tax only applies to the wealthiest 0.2%. And my Republican colleagues, who are so anxious to protect the interests of the wealthy and the powerful, they want to eliminate that. But I think we should move in a very different direction. And that is why, along with Congresswoman Schakowsky, I am introducing the Responsible Estate Tax Act. This legislation, which only applies to the top 0.3%, 99.7% of people will not pay a nickel more in taxes, includes a progressive estate tax structure so that the super wealthy pay more. And this includes a progressive estate tax rate structure so that the super wealthy pay more. It establishes a 10% surtax on billionaires. It closes estate tax loopholes that have allowed the wealthy to avoid billions in estate taxes. It exempts the first $3.5 million of an estate from federal taxation, $7 million for couples. So with that, let me introduce somebody who has been one of the strongest advocates for working families in the U.S. House, Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky.
I want to thank Senator Sanders for his work on this legislation and so many other things that are to protect the vast majority of Americans. He's a true progressive champion. I'm proud, again, to work with you, Bernie, to make our tax code more fair. As Bernie said, this country is the richest country on the face of the earth, and we have never been richer than we are at this very moment. But this period of extreme wealth is also one of extreme inequality. The richest 0.1% of Americans has as much wealth as the least affluent 90% of us. Turns out that the easiest way to make a fortune in the United States is the old-fashioned way, inheritance. The House Republicans want to make Paris Hilton and her bratty brother and other rich kids even richer by completely repealing the estate tax, which they voted to do in April. So if you earn $30,000 a year, you pay taxes on it. But if the Republicans had their way, you could inherit a lump sum of $1 billion and not pay a dime. And that would pull an extra $269 billion out of federal investments in infrastructure, education, retirement security, and other priorities, and put it directly in the pocket of privileged couch potatoes. We can do better than that, starting with the Responsible Estate Tax Act. Our bill would amend the estate tax to raise additional revenue for national priorities in a progressive way without taxing any estate on the first $3.5 million inherited by an individual, or $7 million coming from a couple. And that means 99.7% of Americans would experience no tax increase at all. So this should not be a burden. Our bill would add new estate tax rates for inheritance over $10 million and $50 million, with an additional 10% surtax for the Waltons, the Kochs, and other billionaire heirs. Income inequality is a crisis that threatens the very fabric of this country. And it forces us to live in this false atmosphere in this Congress and in governments across the country in a framework of scarcity, which is really unreal and not based on our wealth. So we ought to do something about it, starting with raising billions of dollars from individuals who have done nothing to earn it. The Responsible Estate Tax Act is the way forward, and I am very proud to be the House sponsor of this legislation. Thank you. No, go ahead. I'm good. Let me just say, I am the ranking Democrat on a subcommittee that's meeting right now. I'm going to run, but I want to thank Bernie Sanders again. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. Before we open it up, let me get you to say, let me just say a brief word. All of you are aware of the Supreme Court decision that just came down, so let me just say a word on that, and then we'll open it up. The ruling of the Supreme Court today is a common sense decision that affirms what most of us already knew, and that is that when we passed the Affordable Care Act in 2010, we intended to expand access to affordable, comprehensive health insurance. As Chief Justice Roberts notes in his opinion, and I quote, "Congress passed the ACA to improve health insurance markets, not to destroy them," end of quote. We are the only major country on earth that doesn't guarantee health care to all of our people as a right. Today, 35 million Americans have no health insurance, more are underinsured. The idea that we would simply throw another 6.4 million people off of health insurance and totally disrupt the Affordable Care Act makes no sense to me, and I'm glad that the Supreme Court ruled in the way that it did. Okay, let's go back. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Penny Starr, CNS News. Is this specifically for the estate tax? Because for the regular taxes, the wealthiest people pay more now, don't they?
This just deals with the estate tax.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Could you help us with some of the details?
Sure.
What are the new rates?
Good. Fair enough. I didn't.
What are the loopholes?
How
How much does this raise?
Okay. Fair question. I felt that I was going on too long, so I wanted to shorten it, but I think you have some paper on it. What it does is under this, well, you have the paper there. Is that right? Okay, good. I don't want to read all of the boring details of it. But, anything else? Okay, thank you all very much.
I have a question, sir.
Yes, sir.
Sorry, it's off topic, but recent polling shows that you are surging in Iowa and New Hampshire, catching up with Hillary Clinton. I get you to react to those polls, and do you think that you have, as some have said, a ceiling? You can only go so high because of your politics.
I don't want to get too much into politics today. We're dealing with legislation. Let me just say that I think our campaign is going well. I think the message that we're delivering to the American people is that it is absurd that in the wealthiest country in the history of the world, so few have so much and so many have so little. I think there is growing disenchantment with establishment politics, establishment economics. People want real change. And what we're seeing in events that we're holding around the country, a whole lot of people are coming out who want some change.
I just want to follow up.
Yeah.
Martin O'Malley's Super PAC issued an ad today that's airing in Iowa going after you on guns. saying that you're no progressive on guns. Do you have a response to Governor O'Malley's pact?
Well, in fact, if you look at my record, what you will find is that, in fact, we do have a strong record. I come from a state that has virtually no gun control. That is what exists in Vermont. But I think if you, in fact, look at our record, I'll be happy to get it to you. We will get it to you. It's, in fact, a strong record of having voted against the assault, for the ban on assault weapons, for background checks for gun purchases, for making sure that we have sensible gun safety laws. So I think if you look at the record, it is a strong record. Yeah.
Back to the legislation. Given that the Senate is controlled by Republicans, what are the chances of this actually passing?
Well, you know, that's a good question. And I think the answer is that you're going to see very little legislation passed when you have a Republican majority that sees its main job is to representing the wealthy and the powerful and not the needs of ordinary Americans. It was very interesting. There was a Wall Street poll just the other day, I think. And at a time when most of my Republican colleagues, not all, but most of them want to cut Social Security, you know what the poll said? Overwhelmingly, the majority of the American people want to expand Social Security. At a time when the Republicans want to give more tax breaks to billionaires, you know what the American people say? They say that the wealthiest people should start paying their fair share of taxes, not give them more tax breaks. So I think on minimum wage, the American people are very clear we should raise the minimum wage. We have many Republicans who want to abolish the concept of the minimum wage. So I think what we are seeing, and to answer the gentleman's question about the campaign in general, people understand that the Republican Party, and too many Democrats for that matter, are not standing with the working families of this country, and they want change. So the way change comes about is when people begin to stand up and fight back. And I think that when we organize people to say enough is enough, that we have got to address this grotesque level of income and wealth inequality, in fact, we will be successful in doing that.
So this bill is part of that kind of rallying the troops.
This is a piece of legislation that addresses what I consider to be the most significant moral issue of our time. We have got to ask ourselves, this is the United States of America. Are you comfortable? Are we as a people comfortable when the top 1/10 of 1% own almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%? Do you really think America is about a situation where 99% of all new income goes to the top 1%? Now, inside the Beltway, people may say, well, that's the way it is. That's normal. Go outside of the Beltway, and you know what? People say, that is not what America is supposed to be about. Okay, thank you all very much.
Thanks, Senator.